Everybody knows Sanguine, the jovial lord of debauchery and dark indulgence. Everybody knows that where Sanguine dwells, wine flows like a great winding river, providing sweet succour to thirsty frolickers and mischievous merrymakers in all the myriad realms of revelry. For most mortals, the name Sanguine evokes images of rich mulled wine that warms your cockles, and dark oak brandy that puts fire in the belly and song on the lips. But it would seem some things have been lost in translation. Sanguine may encourage all manner of depravity and vice, but his name, which is associated with a crimson liquid, does not stem from his fondness for wine and brandy. His name is synonymous with the lifeblood of mortals. In our world it's simple. Sanguine in Latin literally means blood. On Tamriel, the Daedra Lord predates the word and its meaning. The slowed necromancer Nagasta put it best. Daedra were born before stars, mortal. Do you consider that perhaps such names preceded, hence perhaps inspired, the concepts they connote? The name Clavicus Vile only evokes unpleasant connotations because the word vile was appropriated from the prince. The same applies to Sanguine. So to some pleasure seekers, the name Sanguine is a joyous one, and drunkards will toast the Daedra Lord's good health. But in other places, there are mortals who can see Sanguine's true meaning, the florid fluid that runs through man, mer and beast alike. Of course, Sanguine's sphere encompasses both blood and wine. They are not mutually exclusive. To be tempted by Sanguine is to be tempted by urges of the flesh, when your blood runs hot with desire, lust and bodily cravings. No mortal is immune to the allure of base pleasures, and this is why Sanguine chooses to take on the form of characters like Sam Gweven, and crawl Tamriel's inns and taverns in search of rambunctious drunkards who may be easily enticed by his wiles. As alcohol taints the blood and leads to potentially irresponsible behaviour, Sanguine taints the mind through indulgence. If the best strategy to seduce a particular mortal doesn't involve wine, that wouldn't stop Sanguine. The Lord of Revelry tastes the shaven fruit, and knows all the manifold manifestations of passion and perversity. So we best put a cork in the bottle, at least for the moment, while we uncover the true nature of everybody's favourite drinking buddy. It's time for Sanguine's intervention. Hey guys, it's Drew here and welcome back to Fudge Muppet. I hardly need to say any more about the topic of today's video. I've talked about Sanguine before on the channel, and we recently discussed him on the Elder Scrolls podcast. But this time, I want to look past the intoxicating aspects we generally associate with the prince. In some cultures, Sanguine is not the jolly old patron of your local pub, but rather the blood god, a title to behold with some reverence. So let's delve into this darker side of Sanguine. Sheogorath's sardonic Chamberlain Haskell once said, "Your lore of those disparate beings that you lump together as Daedra is based on nothing. Lies and half-truths told by traitors, rebels, miscontents and weaklings who have had the misfortune to become involved with mortals." With the venom taken from his words, Haskell is essentially stating that these stark distinctions mortals draw between Aedra and Daedra are not nearly as definitive as we seem to believe. And once we look outside of the typical Cyrodiilic and High Elven pantheons, things get a little bit more complex. A common example of this I tend to refer to as the Khajiit pantheon. Haskell goes on to say, "I am told that the Khajiit revere both the Aedra and the Daedra, worshipping whichever divine seems most applicable to whatever they're praying for or swearing by." And despite his egregious claim that he doesn't like cats, Haskell seems to almost respect the Khajiit for this religious open-mindedness. Outside of the Empire's influence and the spreading grasp of the Dominion, it is not uncommon to see Daedra lords being venerated alongside the gods we typically consider worthy of worship. Depending on the deity, they may still have negative undertones, but that does not diminish their utility in the religion. So let's look at the role of Sanguine to the catfolk of elsewhere. There is a consensus among clan mothers and spiritual leaders that Sanguine is the blood god. Clan mother Anisi says that Fadamai the mother cat told this to Sanguine when he was born. "Sanguine, you are the blood cat, for who can control the urges of blood?" Amon Dro, the silent priest, writes, "Sanguine, blood god of the second litter. Sanguine is not an evil spirit by nature, but Khajiit must know that all things within his sphere turn true cats from the path. These are the urges of blood and pleasure without purpose. To fall to Sanguine is not to give in to the dark, but to give in to the flesh. He tries to tempt Khajiit into making their flesh immortal, and this is a prison to all spirits of the Jacques. Sanguine is therefore a spirit that will test you on the path, and must be overcame. The secret to defeating him is to ignore him, and this we learn from Mephala, who said, "Lust for nothing but truth." And even a Cyrodiilic text, Varieties of Faith in the Empire, states, Sanguine, blood cat, god of death and secret murder. Sanguine's worship is hidden from cat's eye, for who can control the urges of blood? From these excerpts, it's hard to find any commonalities between good old rowdy Sanguine and Sanguine the blood cat. The sphere of secret murder is generally associated with Mephala in most Tamrielic cultures. Even in Morrowind, where Mephala is venerated, the Dunmer proudly attribute deception and assassination with her. In the Khajiiti pantheon, Mephala is an ally of their chief deity Azura, and thus is generally perceived in a positive light. To the catfolk, Mephala is the teaching mother and keeper of ancient secrets. Unlike the Dark Elves, who are flagrant in their reverence of the good Daedra's more morally ambiguous aspects, the Khajiit would understandably like to keep things like murder out of their mainstream worship. This does not mean they compromise Mephala's identity, but rather they choose to remove the malevolence generally associated with her secrecy. The God of Death title therefore goes to the God of Blood and dark desires of the flesh, Sanguine. The Blood Cat is a child of Fadamai, but he is not worshipped publicly. His shrines are hidden, his followers are secretive about their prayers, and gatherings only occur in the dead of night, when Maegris' all-seeing eye is not present above Tamriel. The most noteworthy group of Sanguine's followers are the Hollowfang clan, who dwell in the ancient abandoned ruins of Moongrave Fane in Anakinna. The Hollowfang clan consists of Khajiit vampires, who have mastered the arts of alchemy and blood magic. Even in Elsewhere, Sanguine is still associated with intoxicating substances. In fact, rumour has it among the most inebriated cats that it was Sanguine who gave the Khajiit the secret of wine by spilling the blood of the grapes. He is not credited with the discovery of moon sugar though. That gift was given by Azura when she spoke a whispered secret, and the moon shone down on the marshes, and their light became sugar. Moon sugar might have been Azura's gift to give, but dealing with the cats who are inclined to overindulge is Sanguine's domain. You may wonder, if Sanguine is the god of death and blood to the cats, why is he still the patron of dark-natured temptations and substance abuse? Well, it is intrinsic to Khajiiti spirituality that every cat should follow the path, flying on Kanafi's winds beyond the lattice to reach the sand behind the stars, where the dunes are made from sugar, and every cat feels warmth without end. But there are some gods who strive to lure cats from the path. Sheogorath tests Khajiit on the path by making them doubt the truth of their own thoughts, beliefs and actions. Namira darkens the path so that cats become lost to the light and know only her. Sanguine, though not as noxious as Namira, does prevent Khajiit from following the path. He tempts them with the prospect of making their flesh immortal, imbuing their blood with vampirism. He also offers less severe, but no less pernicious temptations of the flesh. Alcoholism and skooma addiction are enough to doom some cats, leading them to darkness, or the realm of the skooma cat. Bodily desires start off small, but if the blood cat is able to sink his claws in, once pure Khajiit may find themselves performing blood sacrifice among the vampire clans of Elsewhere, or even spilling their own lifeblood in the name of Sanguine. Should a mortal find themselves on the guest list for one of Sanguine's legendary parties, they may consider it fairly innocuous. Who wouldn't want to have a piss-up with a demon who wants nothing more than to show you a good time? Well, a spiritual Khajiit would warn against it. Alcohol corrupts the blood, and that is why it is in the domain of the blood god. The Ayleids, while we know scarce little about their ancient civilization, seem to have reached the sadistic endpoint of this corruption. In many Ayleid kingdoms, the inhabitants began to embrace Daedra worship. One translated Ayleid manuscript reveals that the Heartland Elves referred to Sanguine by a different name, and that name was the blood made pleasure. This title does encapsulate Sanguine's sphere quite well, And when applied to what we do know about Ayleid culture, we can find some clarity. It's no secret that the Heartland Elves took Daedric slaves, and while they were likely used for a variety of different purposes, depending on the city they lived in and the king they served, we do know that some Ayleids tortured these human slaves. Morahouse the Man-Bull wrote the following in his memoirs. This was Sirad, where men knew no freedom. Men were given over to the lifting of stones, and the draining of the fields, and the upkeep of temple and road, or to become art tortures for strange pleasures, as in the wailing wheels of Vindazul, and the gut gardens of Sursen, and flesh sculpture, which was everywhere among the slaves of the Ayleids in those days. Or worse, the realms of the Fire King Hardhul, where the begetting of drugs drawn from the admixture of Daedrons into living hosts let one inhale new visions of torment, and children were set aflame for nighttime tiger sport. Whenever we talk about the Ayleids, it's impossible not to bring up this disturbing account. Torture and cruelty are as awful as they are prevalent in ancient times. But what makes this kind of torture especially abhorrent is the creativity. The Ayleids who partook in these tortures were artistically inspired and entertained by them. The term art torture is astounding in its depravity. When I said that Sanguine's name in the Heartland was blood made pleasure, you probably thought what I thought. Pleasures of the flesh, sex and skooma, and wine that makes your head swim. Even Sanguine's myriad realms of revelry evoke the same notion. They are individual and personalised to suit the tastes of the lucky subject. But to the Ayleids, blood made pleasure was far more literal in its meaning, spilling the blood of others for the sole purpose of pleasure. Unthinkable brutality against the helpless for the entertainment of the masses. The Heartland Elves took Sanguine's typical sphere of debauchery and dark desire, and indulged until they found themselves implementing the more extreme side of Sanguine's sphere, blood and death, sacrifice and murder most gruesome. The Book of Daedra offers this description of Sanguine's nature. Sanguine, whose sphere is hedonistic revelry and debauchery, and passionate indulgences of darker natures. But the Book of Daedra barely scratches the surface of what it means to indulge darker natures. The Daedric demi-prince Fan Wee Hen states this about Sanguine. It is in Sanguine's nature to indulge the natures of others, particularly their darker desires. So, to Sanguine, absolute control is anathema. This willingness to grant total control to the subject is precisely what allows his sphere to grow in such a malignant fashion. Most mortals fear only the prospect of a hangover when they encounter Sanguine, but that's only the beginning of what this prince is capable of. There will always be reveling cultists caught up in the glamour of this Daedra Lord of Lust. But beneath Sanguine's alluring facade, fueling the perverse passions and dark desires of his followers, there is the god of blood, death, and corruption of the flesh. And there you have it, guys. I have to end the video as a cheery-looking Breton has just offered to buy me a drink. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed it, and thanks so much for watching. My name is Drew, you've been watching Fudge Muppet, and I'll see you in the next one.